Right. Hello, everyone. Nice to have everyone back here again. Let's. So today we are covering chapter 9, Swap Part 1. So swap is the third derivative that we're going to talk about. Right. So it's from the name itself, we can roughly guess it's something about exchange. Right. You swap. Right. So it's about exchanging one financial instrument with another party's financial instruments. Right. Like for example, it could be a swapping of the exchange rate or currency. Right. So it's a swap, and swap has grown over the years. So people can has come to know about this swap, and they thought there's also an investment opportunity for people to basically hedge against price differences. So if you look at the swap itself, we're going to cover basically four different types of swap, right? The interest rate swap, the currency swap, right? Swapping of currency, the swapping of commodities, and also swapping of shares. Okay, shares. So what does interest rate swap means? Right. So basically, it's a swapping of interest rate. If you have been taking loan, next time I'm sure when you buy a house, you'll be encountering some of this interest rate, where we talk about fixed interest rate, floating interest rate, right? Interest rate that fluctuates, right, over the months, and or you prefer those uh, the fixed kind of exchange interest rate, right? So the fixed payment. So interest rate itself, there's a variety. So we'll basically be focusing on some of this, like fixed swap exchange rate with another floating payment, right? So it's the exchange of a fixed payment and for a floating, right? And some of these floating interest rate might tie with some of these London either bank exchange rate, or it could be a SAW, right? Singapore offer rate, or it could also be SIBOR, right? So we will also be talking about that Singapore interbank exchange rate. So basically, it's usually about fixed rate and swap floating rates. Of course, interest rate doesn't just cover just fixed and floating, but can also be floating exchange with another floating rate, or a fixed exchange rate swapping with another exchange rate. So the interest rate basically tries to is built in place to limit the exposure of the market exchange rate fluctuations. So it's also try to manage the risk exposure, right? And hopefully, in the event of hopefully attaining a better interest or more favorable interest rate to the party. Right, so let's take a look at a simple example over here. So here we have a company, let's say a company who want to borrow money, right? So typically a company would want to borrow money or would like to have new flash of funding for buying new equipment, right? For expansion, etc. So they might borrow from a lender, right? So a lender can offer the bank or the company a floating interest rate, which means it fluctuate, right? Like if you take a look at this arrow, it's a wavy kind of arrow, basically referring to floating rate, right? Floating means it like float on the water, on the wave, water wave, and it basically move up and down, right? So it move according to some of the interbank exchange rate, right? So here we have one scenario. Let's say we have one scenario: a borrowing company who want to borrow from a lender, and the lender actually offer him a floating interest rate, which means that the interest rate change every month. Okay, it fluctuates, but it might not be ideal for this company, right? Like this, right? Might not be ideal for a company. Usually, company don't like something that is unpredictable. Some month you pay, like say 5%, next month you pay like 8%. So then the next month you pay another 10%, it might go up and down, right? But because this kind of fluctuation would have people can't manage some of these costs, right? So some bank want to be predictable so they can maintain a stable operating cost, etc. Right? So they might want to prefer borrowing a fixed rate, which is more stable. So, but in this case, the bank, the company, sorry, they couldn't find a lender that could actually give them a fixed rate. So what happened is they'll continue to borrow from this lender a floating rate, right? What they can do is this is one of the contract. Then they have another in contract, which is what we are talking about, the interest rate financial instrument, which is a new concept that we're going to talk about, right? The interest rate swap agreement. So what he can do is the borrowing company can actually work with a bank, okay, a financial institute like Hong Leong Bank, JP Morgan, right, a bank or financial or any local bank to work out a swap agreement, which states that they will do a interest rate swap, which means what? The floating rate over here, okay, will be absorbed by this bank. The banks will pay the floating rate, right, which could be similar to this floating rate, and in return, the company will pay the bank a fixed rate instead of floating rate. So this is the swap rate interest agreement, right? So they have this agreement to basically it's like kind of like swapping. You can see over here it's like swapping, right? The bank will pay me a floating rate interest, and I will pay the bank the company a floating rate, and then the company will pay the bank a fixed rate. Okay, so that's this swap agreement. So you can see that this whole scenario, what does it pan out like, right? The net effect of this company, right, will be what? This floating rate, okay, is actually paid by this bank. Okay, this floating rate, which I need to pay this lender, the bank will help me pay. In return, the net effect is what I actually pay a fixed loan interest for the money this lender is lending it to me, the principal amount, right? So you can see that in a swap rate interest over here, there's nothing about the principal, right, that is being given, right? So basically, it's just the swapping of the interest rate. So that's the net effect. Okay, it's actually a fixed rate because the bank is helping me to pay for the floating rate over here. Right, so what example of a fixed rate, right? So a fixed rate loan, you have seen, it could also be a bond, coupon rate, right? Remember the very first few chapters that we talk about the bond. Bond is actually like the IOU, right? But in return, you pay me a fixed coupon rate, right? So that is a fixed interest rate. Floating rate, on the other hand, will varies according to some reference index, right? So it could be varies according to the Singapore Interbank Exchange Rate, right? Singapore Interbank Exchange Offer Rate, right? Or a London, okay, Interbank Offer Rate, right? So they will based on certain indices, and these indices might go up and down, right? So like uh, London Interbank Offer Rate. This is basically the London at certain time every day they will basically determine what kind of interest rate they will want to rent out. Okay, just like recently, because of the this COVID-19, right? The U.S. Federal Express or the U.S. Central Rate actually dropped the interest rate, which means the interest rate that you will lend to the bank. So in turn, the bank will offer a cheaper rate. So it actually lowered the interest rate. So it has the power to lower the interest rate in view of the economy is not doing well. Okay, so they might want to reduce the economic burdens on the company by lowering the borrowing rate, right? Because the companies are all not doing well, the economies are all not doing well, so they need to take loan. Okay, so in order to ensure that they can borrow at a cheaper rate, so the Federal Express will be actually the first few to basically lead the whole banking finance by lowering the interest rate. Okay, so here we have one example, okay, of a fixed to fixed interest rate swap. Okay, so you have an interest rate which means we are basically swapping of interest rate, fixed interest rate. So let's take a look at this example, right? So you can read through this. The American firms want to take out a loan in United States at 7%. Okay, so but actually the American wanted a loan in yen, right, in a different currency to finance one of his expansion projects. Okay, in Japan. Okay, so but if you were to borrow the yen in Japan, let's take a look at this diagram. It's the same as this. You can read from this. So let's say we have a U.S. company, right, who want to invest in Japan or expand program in Japan. He actually wanted to borrow some yen since he's doing business in doing the expansion in Japan. He would definitely need a yen, right? So to pay for some of these workers expansion constructions, right? So in yen, you need to borrow. But since the U.S. in Japan is a foreign country, company, right? So the rate of exchange or rate of lending interest is actually higher, right? Since it's a foreign company, so maybe 10%. So he wanted this. But maybe U.S. company, if they were to borrow a U.S. dollar, right, it actually only commands 7%, right? So this is one scenario. Then we have another scenario, right? So happen that there's another Japanese company who want to also have an expansion in or do a project in U.S., right? So it need U.S. dollars, right? But if you were to borrow the U.S. dollar, right, you will have to pay a higher interest again because it's a foreign company, right? Since it's just like you're a foreigner, you lend you higher, but if you're a local citizen, you enjoy some local privilege, right? So same Japan, if you will borrow yen, since it's the same currency, right? Local currency, so it can actually borrow 9%, right? So this Japan company need US dollar, and this US dollar need Japanese yen, right? So one at borrow at 10%, and this can borrow the US dollar at 12. So, but you can see that the Japan can actually borrow at 9% yen. So what happened is, hey, we have a scenario here, right, where these two companies can come together and form a fixed to fixed swap agreement, right? Which means what? Hey, US dollar, since you need yen, right? US dollar, since you need yen, why not? This Japanese company will help you to borrow the yen, right? US dollar, the US company need yen, Japan company can borrow a cheaper yen, right? This one borrow 10%, but the Japanese company can borrow at 9%. So why not we work out something? Like for example, Japan company, why not you help me borrow the yen, and the US I help you borrow the US dollar, right? You see, the US borrows US dollar at 7%, whereas the Japan can borrow at 12%. So I help you borrow at a lower compared to this 12, and Japan company helped me to borrow the yen at a lower 9 compared to 10. So we can work out something like this, right? So for the mutual benefits, right? This is a win-win situation where you help me borrow a currency at a cheaper rate, and I help you borrow a currency at a cheaper rate, and then we do a swap, right? We can do a swap. So this is what happened in a swap. So that is for fixed to fixed, but it can also apply to fixed and floating rate, right? So we have a fixed and floating rate. You can also do the same, right? So company A again, okay, this is company A. You want to basically he can actually loan, okay, a US dollar at a fixed rate 8% and a floating rate at LIBOR 1+1. So this is the floating rate. Whereas company B, okay, can borrow at a fixed rate 6% and a floating plus 3%. Right? So uh, you might ask why different company they borrow at different rate. So there could be a lot of reasons, right? Maybe you want this company. If I'm a company who is very reliable and very big, right? The banks might offer me a lower interest rate, right? And versus another company who is new, right, and have not got any track record or profitable and got no collateral to pledge, right? The bank might want to offer him a higher loan interest rate, right? Simply because maybe the company is a little bit less reliable, and maybe my company I'm more reliable, and also I also put a lump sum of saving with the bank, so they have better they get to enjoy special interest rate or privilege rate. So different companies sometimes do have different this kind of preference prefer rate of that given to them, right? So we have this scenario again, right? So different company, different fixed rate, different floating rate. So here you have another company B also have a different fixed rate and different floating rate, right? And some company they prefer to have a fixed rate, some company prefer to have floating rate. So it depends on the company's operation requirement, right? So XYZ they prefer fixed rate, AYZ they prefer floating rate. Okay, so like here, so this 8%, this is LIBOR plus one. So maybe what I can do is company A can company B can help to borrow at a 6% rate for A, right? And company A can also help to borrow at floating rate. Okay, since LIBOR plus one is lower for company B, right? So that's how things can be swapped. Right? You look at your mutual agreement and you can do a swap, right? So that's the interest rate. I help you borrow at a better floating rate. You help me borrow at a better fixed rate, and we can do a swap exchange. Okay, so here also another example, fixed for the swap floating rate. So you have a company, okay, who want to borrow from investor. It's LIBOR plus one, plus 0.3%, right, in the bank. So you can work out a swap agreement, okay, because maybe this company actually wanted a fixed rate, but this investor can't afford to give him a fixed interest rate, right? So this guy maybe borrow 50 million, right? 50 million pounds over 7 years, right? So he actually borrow the 50 pounds. Okay, this is 50 pounds, right? So basically the principal amount come from this guy, right? So this guy will give him the 50 pounds, then he will pay the floating interest rate. But the investor might not want to have a fixed rate, so no choice. I borrow a floating rate LIBOR plus 0.3, right? Then I go ahead, but I still want to have a fixed rate. So what I can do is I can have a swap agreement I create a swap agreement, or I work with this bank to come out with some agreement, right? So the bank will pay me, I'll pay the bank fixed rate, okay, 6.1%, for example. Then the banks, okay, will give me a LIBOR rate, okay, LIBOR rate. So you can see that what is the net effect of this? Okay, what's the net effect of this? The net effect is actually LIBOR plus 0.3, right? Since this guy is paying, so the LIBOR and the LIBOR will cancel out, right? Because I pay out LIBOR plus 1, plus 0.3, and this pay me LIBOR, right? So somebody going to pay me the L for me, so cancel out. So I only need to pay actually what? 0.3%, right? I only pay 0.3% interest to this guy, right? And I also have to pay 6.1%, right? So 6.1% plus 0.3%, that will give me a 6.4% net. Okay, so eventually with all this whole scenario, what it work out is actually I pay a net, okay, of 6.1 and 6.4 fixed interest rate, which is what I want. Okay, so that could be the outcome that you want. And you notice that who's actually the real lender? The real lender is actually this guy, the investor, 50 million uh, pounds, right, across 7 years. The banks are not offering that 50 million. The bank is only just helping me to pay for the floating rate LIBOR, right, without the plus 3%. So I still have to fork out 3%. and I still have to pay the 6.1. So the resultant, what goes out and what goes out is actually the net, right? Net payment of every month I have to pay 6.4%, right? So 6.4% is actually better if this company, which is credit rating BBB, right, which is not that good, right? BBB is not that good. So if you were to offer his own coupon, right, the highest you ever get, the interest rate that you obtain is 6.6, right? So 6.6 is not better than 6.4, right? So this net interest is actually lower, right, than 6.6. So you might not want to go through the by raising fund by using issuing bonds, okay, because issue bond is also a fixed interest rate, so it's no longer better. So you can actually opt for doing this swap agreement, right? Sorry, it's a bit messy, but I hope you have got the clear copy, so you can take a look at the clear copy. But I would like to scribble here so that you can see where I'm coming from, where I'm describing. So this again, some of the write-outs. You can take a look at this write-out if you still can't follow through, right? So if I were to issue my own bond, right, and since the company is a triple B rating, right, which is not very good, a better company will be triple A rating. So triple A rating simply means it's a higher rating, a better company who is better in payment, right? So later on we talk about this, but in any case, the interest issue, if you were to issue a bond, the kind of fixed rate you can get is actually 6.6. But versus if I go through the swap agreement, which is actually better, so paying 6.4. Right, just now I already show you how you can get the 6.4. It's basically the LIBOR and LIBOR. But since I'm actually borrowing a LIBOR plus 0.3, the LIBOR part, right? The LIBOR might fluctuate. It could be 1%, it could be 2%. So if the LIBOR is 1%, then the whole thing that I have to pay is LIBOR plus 0.3, which is actually 1 plus 0.3 will become 1.3. Right? So you can take it as the LIBOR or the SIBOR as a variable. Right? So it depends on what's the variable given, right, at that time. So you add on to this. So there you have the floating part is actually being cancelled off. So the net effect is actually the 6.1 plus the 0.3 that gives you the 6.4, right? So which is a lower cost than issuing bond, right? How much is the issuing bond? If they were to go through the issuing bond, it's actually 6.6, right? So that actually is a kind of things that the company might have to go through. Whether should I raise fund by issuing bond, or should I raise fund by borrowing from the investor and going to a swap contract agreement? So these are some of the considerations that companies might go through, right? So this is some calculations. So just now we were talking, back to this. Sometimes we were talking about all this credit rating, right? So what exactly is this credit rating? Just now we saw the company credit rating BBB, right? It's just like a student, right? A student is B grade versus a student A grade. So which one do you like, right? If you are the job interviewer, obviously you will go for a better grade student, right? Because the students are smarter, more hardworking, clever, etc. Right? So same for in a company, right? When company goes to the bank to borrow money, in fact the bank actually give every people, every customer, every company certain credit rating, right? Based on what? Based on the past historical, right? For example, if you're a person who every time when the credit card bill comes to you, you pay on time or you pay in full, right? You don't take loan, right? Then you are A grade customer versus somebody who every time credit card bill come will only pay the minimum amount, right? Will not pay in full, will not do repayment in full, will always drag payments, or every time the payment is always overdue, never pay, right? Or something like this. So companies, banks actually go through all these credit rating by rating you according to how good the customer you are, how how good is your repayment, right? If you are a person who can repay everything on time, then you're A grade. If you always drag your payment, always never pay out in full, right? And every time default your payment overdue, then you might be rated B, right? That also have an impact on next time when you want to ask for credit card or not, right? Issue a credit card. So every bank does have some credit rating for certain customer, right? It could also based on your income salary, how much you do earning versus if you don't earn a lot, right? So they might not give you a better grade rating, so which means that they might offer you a higher interest rate because you are less reliable, you are more likely to be in debt, and chances is if I lend you money, I might not be able to get back money from you again, right? So they do this kind of rating. So same for countries. What you can see over here, you can see the Moody's, the S&P. They are being giving rating for different countries. Okay, different countries rating. Like US, they are considering US, Japan are considering like almost triple A, or A grading, countries because they are essentially quite wealthy, right? And quite advanced in their achievement. So they are given triple A, right? So if America want to lend money, or central bank would love to lend them money, right? And they are deemed to be quite reliable. Versus countries like, for example, is Greece, right? Greece is almost like C credit rating, right? Which means that this country is poor. Right? Do you know that at one point in time, the Greece nearly go bankrupt? A country, can you remember? Believe it, a country nearly go bust, which means they got no money, right? So Greece is one of them, right? So that's why their credit rating is given as B, as C or triple C, which means they are not, their their risk, moderate risk is very high. Likely, if you're going to lend them money, high chances they might not be able to pay you the interest or even pay back the loan. They're not likely going to be bankrupt or, or basically going to default your payment. Okay, there is no D as of now. D usually means like kind of like bankrupt. Yeah. So same, right? So this is the kind of swap they can think of. So like for example, XYZ is a credit B, so they might not be able to. You can see that this is a company rating BBB, right? So their lending rate is like LIBOR plus one, right? Versus this triple A rating, right? Triple A rating, where's my triple A rating company, right? So instead of LIBOR plus one, I can actually have a lower interest rate. Sorry, I couldn't see my cursor. Where's my cursor? Oh, right? It's actually a LIBOR, right? Versus this LIBOR plus one. And even the fixed rate is also lower, right? For a triple A, so you can see that this B triple B 10%, whereas if you are a triple A company, you get it at lower fixed interest rate, 8.2%. Okay, 1 or 2% can mean a lot of interest, you know. Right? Imagine if you borrow $1 million, 1% of 1 million is how much? That's almost $100,000, of interest, extra interest payment that you pay, or even more. Right? So that's where you can see in a nutshell XYZ can actually borrow. Right? Since this is a BBB, triple B kind of a rating. This is actually a triple A, right? So you can see that generally borrow everything fixed or floating is actually lower, right? It's actually lower. So they might be able to work out something lah, right? So what can they work out? So uh, so XYZ, okay, being the triple B, and this is a company, so they can borrow things. So maybe what the AYZ can do is I can help you to borrow at fixed rate, and XYZ can help me to borrow at a floating rate plus one. even though it's I can borrow at cheaper, but you help me borrow, but I pay you a little bit more. So they can actually work out a swap contract like this, right? So here, this is a swap contract. This is XYZ, which is actually a B grade company, and this is a A grade company, right? So these two, they can go ahead like this AYZ. I'll help you borrow at 8.25. You help me borrow at this floating rate, okay, LIBOR plus one. But they can work out something in between, where they can do. This is the swap agreement. Not easy. They basically do through try and error, changing the number, changing the floating rate or whatever, right? But the net effect is after they borrow, going through all this swap agreement, right? It might work out something that EYZ, okay, can actually borrow LIBOR, right? As long as I can go through this swap agreement and I can borrow a floating rate that is better than LIBOR, why not, right? And the fixed, next, since XYZ, they want a fixed rate, if I can get a loan rate that is lower than 10%, which is what I can borrow, why not? Okay, so if they go through, this is what happens in the net effect, right? The net effect is without the swap, I can borrow at 10%. But with the swap, going through just now this hassle of this swap agreement, now I can lower my cost. Okay, this is with swap, right? With swap, I can borrow instead of 10% fixed rate. Now I can work out something that is 9.75. That's very good, right? That's a saving of 0.25%. Whereas EYZ, right? AYZ, I'm looking at floating rate, right? But if I were to borrow by myself, okay, what is the rate I can get? LIBOR, right? But what happens if I go through the swap? I get LIBOR minus 0.5, right? Minus 0.5, which means that I have also got a saving of 0.2, 0.5%. That's also quite a lot, right? So I would want to go up, go through this swap contract. Okay, so this swap contract is basically the net effect of this whole thing, right? Going through all this and be able to work out a swap agreement like this. So they do a plus minus until they find that the net effect is actually got saving, both got saving. Okay, so it's a win-win situation, right? So you can see that in the swap contract, it's actually unlike the forward or future contract. The swap contract is actually a win-win situation for both parties, right? In the earlier directive, you see that the future or the forward, there's one losing party. Either the long will lose money or the short will lose money. But in this case, you look at this swap, it's actually a win-win situation. So uh, the whole derivative work out to be a bit different, right? It's a win-win situation for both, right? So anyway, you go back and think about it, right? Look at it. We will have also got a tutorial that will run through similar concept on this, okay? Where the basically both parties will go through undergo a swap agreement like this, and both parties will actually incur a good saving for both, right? So unless there's a saving, otherwise the swap contract will not be able to get through. So in the swap agreement, you'll find that there's actually no exchange of principal amount, right? So if you look at this, this is a swap contract. There's no exchange of the 50 million. It's all about just the interest payment. Just you help me pay, I help you pay, and you pay the net effect, right? The actual principal still they actually go to their respective borrower, lender to basically lend the money from. So that is the main, uh, their main principle, right? So what here is basically just the swapping of the interest, different interest payment. Okay, so the interest payment is usually net off. They can also work out that they pay the differences. So another case study to look at is actually swapping of the currency. So that's how we saw the swapping of interest rate. Now we take a look at the swapping of currency. Okay, so now we also have a case where let's say uh, the World Bank want to actually borrow Swiss franc, right? IBM actually I want to borrow US dollar, right? But then you find that actually the World Bank can actually borrow US dollar at or exchange US dollar at a better exchange rate, whereas IBM can actually borrow a Swiss franc at a better exchange rate. So why not you help me, right? So IBM will help the World Bank borrow the Swiss franc and then give the Swiss franc, right? And then the World Bank will help me borrow, will help IBM borrow the US dollar at a favorable exchange rate, and then do a spot transaction, means a swap transaction. So they swap the interest rate, right? So it's in a nutshell, it's just like you're Malaysian, I'm Singaporean, right? So you help. I need ringgit. Since you're Malaysian, you can get a better local rate in Malaysia. So you help me exchange some ringgit. I help you exchange some Sing dollar, and then I give you my Sing dollar. You give me by ringgit because you Malaysian might need Sing dollar to buy some Sing goods. I want to go Malaysia. I want to go Genting, so I want to spend my ringgit. So you help me borrow, exchange ringgit, and I help you exchange Sing dollar, and we actually swap not just the interest rate but also swap the principal, the Sing dollar. Right? If you need 500 Sing dollar, I swap for you. Right? You need 500 ringgit, I actually also exchange the money for you. Right? So you can see that there's a swapping of they are swapping of the interest rate. You help me pay for the interest rate, I help you pay for the interest rate, and I also give you the same principal amount, and I also you gave me the principal amount. So this is where it's like the swapping of the currency, right? Swapping of currency. I'm Singaporean, need ringgit. You Malaysian, you need Sing dollars. I swap, right? Swap. I basically help you to re-exchange the principal also, right? The principal amount plus also the interest rate also goes in. So basically, this nutshell in the last example. So take a look at the second scenario, right, and try to understand, right. So if you have any question, maybe we can discuss again. So uh, with that, I think I want to thank you for all your time, and we thank you for your attention. So we'll end this chapter on swap. Okay, we'll continue the swap part 2 later on. Right. So what happened now is sorry about noise behind. Noise so crowded. Okay, thank you. Sign off soon. Let me just toggle over and stop the recording. Okay, signing out.